Thanks, Adriana. The reality here now is lots of people have arrived. It should be the case that I've got you thinking about some things you might have understood, and I imagine that people who are at home switching in and out are sort of having their eyes opened in relation to some of these subject matters. The people who are up next, two fellows you're going to hear chat, very different. Mehdi is doing incredible things. He'll speak to what his business is. He's helping build out this ecosystem. Doesn't seek out attention, but is rated incredibly highly by everybody for the work that he's doing. Fundamentally, making sure that he's a safe space for people to work. It's really important work, and I can tell you, he's a very good example of the way that we generally, within the community, view the community. I had him sitting on a working group, and he's not there to say this is the promised land and it's fantastic and we should all push into it and there's nothing wrong here. He's someone that says, this is hard work. There are challenges that we have and we should sort of work through them. And again, that's one of the consistent messages we're putting out to the ecosystem. We're not shilling product. The people in this room are trying to build things, and we're not saying it's not without its complexity and its challenges. And Mehdi is a very good example of that kind of conversation. Anthony Sassano is known to many people. You can tell that because when he tweets, many people respond. So he tends to stay off the Twitter sometimes because he doesn't mind a fight, doesn't mind punching on when people are talking about the Ethereum sort of landscape. He's been doing that for years. And that continuity, that consistency is a pretty extraordinary thing to watch. I said to him when I was chatting about him participating here at this event that I didn't actually know this was his voice. Again, because I played my podcasts at nearly 2x speed, I just have this faster version of him. He's really excited every time he speaks. And so he still talks quickly. He said to me, if you're playing it faster, he said, I already speak quickly. So the aim today was for them to sit down and have a conversation, a dialogue. They're pretty extraordinary views of the world, and I'm very grateful that they've both committed the time to do that. So I welcome them both to the stage.
See here, there?
Wherever.
Sure.
Fine. Cool. Well, I have questions on my phone, so. Cool. All right. Hey, everyone. Some of you, as Steve said, will know me from Twitter. My name's Anthony Sassano. I've been in the Ethereum space for quite a while as an educator primarily. And Mehdi Zerouali here is co-founder of Sigma Prime, works on the Lighthouse client, ETH2, consensus layer client, whatever we're calling it these days. And we're here to talk about all things ETH2, consensus layer, merge, stuff like that. I know there's a lot of questions around the merge, the merging of the proof of work and proof of stake networks, and who better to answer those questions than one of the core developers themselves. So I guess the first thing I want to start with is kind of talking about developing one of these clients from a client perspective. We obviously hear a lot about it from different people, obviously from myself as an educator, from the researchers, things like that, but from an actual client developer's perspective, kind of developing out in the open especially. Obviously that's something we were just talking about, like developing these things out in the open is very different to doing it as part of like a centralized company where everything's closed behind doors until you actually want the public to see it. Whereas with developing a kind of consensus layer client or any kind of like client is done in the open, everyone gets to see your work, everyone gets to comment on the work. So yeah, can you give us that kind of like perspective?
Yeah, sure. So just to give you guys an idea, the Lighthouse project was started by my co-founder Paul as a side project. He was working on it on his weekends, turned into this massive beast that's now responsible for securing a lot of value. The Lighthouse project is really quite unique, I'd say, or Ethereum consensus development is quite unique for various different reasons. It combines a lot of different areas, right? So computer science, obviously, economics, lots of cryptography, lots of maths, and we're kind of bundling all these great things together to try to build a better, more sustainable, more secure Ethereum. The thing you mentioned, I think, is quite important around building in the open and having effectively no sorts of authority dictating a roadmap. Just to give you a rough idea, there's probably 100, 150 people working on this stuff. And we don't have like a boss telling us what to do, right? Danny Ryan, who you should be hearing from in a few hours, if I'm not mistaken, is doing a fantastic job in coordinating everything. But obviously, those design decisions have to be made by the community. So it's quite difficult to effectively get to consensus when you have 150 people spread across different time zones. They do not necessarily all have the same level of context, technical skills, yet we need to hear out every single one of them. because potentially there's going to be very, very valuable input that may require a massive change in stuff that we have done 2 years ago. But this has been the approach. A lot of people are asking, why is the merge taking so long? Why is Ethereum 2.0 not here yet? I believe this is probably one of the main reasons. Building in the open is hard. When you have so much scrutiny, when you actually effectively welcome anyone to come and participate and give their feedback, these things take a lot of time.
Yeah. I mean, just on that note, I think what a lot of people miss is that it's not just like Vitalik sitting there being a dictator, telling everyone what to do. As you mentioned, Danny Ryan, who's the lead coordinator of this effort, he's not doing that either. You actually have to consider, as you said, everyone's opinion, which is crazy when you think about it. I mean, like, not to say that, the opinion is bad or good or anything like that, but you have to consider it just as this is the way kind of like it works.
Can you imagine, like, in the normal sort of corporate world, if you had like an IT project and every man and his dog could just rock up and suggest something? Chaos, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the funny thing is, when I kind of look at it from outside the kind of a core perspective, there's no direct messaging either. It's not like you have like a marketing or PR department at Ethereum telling, kind of structuring things in such a way that everyone can kind of like easily understand it and that it's kind of like sanitized, right? There's no sanitization with any of this stuff. If there's even a hint of a delay in anything, everyone starts talking about it, different media covers it. There's no press release or anything like that.
Yeah, the good thing with having so many people involved is that we kind of have to write up our thoughts a lot.
Yes.
So that we can share them with everyone who's building the same stuff. So I guess as a result, the benefit is that we do, write up a lot of proposals, a lot of designs that, in most cases, maybe not in most cases, but in a lot of cases, just end up in the bin. But it's the iterative protocol development approach, which is, I think, one of the most fascinating things we've ever accomplished as like, might be a big word, but like as a human race, like it's incredible when you think about it. Coordinating so many people, using so many different building blocks and disciplines is quite extraordinary. And at least that's what I think got us into it. That and the fact that we really wanted to get rid of proof of work as soon as possible. That's what Paul, the reason why Lighthouse started is because we very early on realized that proof of work was so obsolete and needed really to go as soon as we could. So Paul made it a mission of his to help with that transition. And yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah. I mean, you guys and the rest of the client teams have done so much amazing work over the years. And I guess you were talking about like the iterative design and improvements over time. And we were just talking about just before about how like not many people know a few years ago, the entire kind of proof of stake roadmap, or what the work up until that point was kind of like scrapped and basically started anew again. And this was done during the bear market, so obviously not many people were paying attention, but it's funny how like no one talks about that, even though that was the biggest change. Like these little kind of delays that we see in things is nothing compared to what was happened back then.
What Anthony's talking about is a couple of years of hard work from Ethereum Foundation researchers that we decided was just not going the right way. Well, it's a bit of a simplification here, but there's basically more efficient ways of achieving the same stuff in a very simplistic manner that sort of appeared later on. But yeah, it's these things take time. We understand that the community really want these upgrades as soon as possible. People complain about gas prices and whatnot. Just so you know, there's lots of very, very talented people working around the clock to make this happen.
And speaking of gas prices, the merge itself does not reduce gas fees, guys. I just want to get that out there. It's something that I always have to remind people of because for some reason everyone believes it does. So
many.
It's so bad. I guess speaking of something topical recently, so on Twitter, there's been, over the past couple of days, there's been a lot of talk about funding core developers, whether they be part of the Ethereum Foundation or outside of the Ethereum Foundation. So I wanted to kind of like get your perspective on kind of like funding in general for different teams, because obviously not every one of these client developer teams are part of the Ethereum Foundation. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are independent. And at Sigma Prime, you guys don't just build Lighthouse. You do other things as well to generate revenue here. So I'll let you kind of like touch on that, and there's a couple of other things related to that as well.
Yeah, sure. So we are a blockchain security firm. So we provide all sorts of security assessment services to some of the most prominent projects in the space. Lots of smart contract auditing, as you can imagine, keeping us very, very, very busy these days. And it's obviously helping sort of fund the Lighthouse development. Well, to be completely honest, it helped fund the Lighthouse development early on, right? Before Lighthouse got a lot of traction, got a lot of support from the community, from the Ethereum Foundation, this effort was bootstrapped by the company using the funds that we just mentioned. In terms of public good funding, there's always, I find, always like some sort of drama happening on Twitter about the topic. Just so you guys know, the way we work is, we can't spin up a token, can we? Like, this is, the native token is ETH. That's what the token is. So it's potentially difficult to come up with incentives that are aligned with everyone in the long run. So there's this great initiative that was put in place by the Ethereum Foundation that you guys may have heard of, called the Client Incentive Program. So we basically got a whole bunch of Ether that's locked up, and we would get access to that ETH periodically throughout the next 3 years based on milestone achievements. So the first one is, I believe, the merge. So once we actually have the merge in production, the client teams will have access to the first tranche of those tokens. And those funds are effectively there to help us provide enough funding for the Lighthouse team over the coming years. On top of that, we do request regularly, on a regular basis, I'd say perhaps twice a year, grants from the Ethereum Foundation to cover for salaries and whatnot. And on top of that, there's other great initiatives that are happening in the space. Protocol Guild is one of them. I'm sure you've heard of it. For those who haven't, some very, very cool people from the Ethereum Foundation have decided to reach out to the most prominent projects in building on Ethereum and ask them to basically commit a percentage, a very small, tiny percentage of their treasury to fund public goods in the long run. So they'll be spinning up a proper DAO structure where you have beneficiaries who have been involved with the protocol at the layer 1 level, and some sort of continuous sort of control of their contributions over time, and their sort of interest within the DAO, within the guild, will be vested over time. So lots of new mechanisms, I guess, are popping up to help with that problem. Lots of generous donors. Some of you may be around here, but lots of whales in the space. Lots of people who have made really well, done really well, and are, I guess, smart enough to understand that they sort of should give back if they want to see this technology successful in the long run. So it's probably in their best interest to help us, because by helping us, we're making sure that we can write the best software that we possibly can.
Yeah, and I always think about it as kind of like a tragedy of the commons thing, where there is definitely a small set of people providing outsized value to the network, to the ecosystem, and they share very little in the rewards. Like some DeFi project that spins up and has a token, the founders can stand to make 8, 9, 10, potentially 10 figures off the back of the work that the Ethereum core developers are doing to keep the network sustainable, to keep it running, to keep it live. Like, a lot of people don't realize how hard it is to actually keep the network live and to make sure that it doesn't fall over. And the reason why the gas fees are high, that's one of the things that is in place, congestion control, to make sure the network actually doesn't fall over. But then everyone screams about the gas fees, and you kind of see where I'm going with this. It's like a rock and a hard place for the core developers. And from your perspective, I'm sure you feel it as well, where you kind of try to do the right thing, but by doing the right thing, a lot of people don't understand that that's the right thing to do, and that's why you can do this, but then they get angry about other things. So it's kind of like always a battle.
Absolutely, 100%. All the time.
Yeah. And that, just about that validator incentive program as well, the cool thing about it is that it's actually in validators. So they're actually validators on the beacon chain. So the teams don't necessarily have to cash out that ETH or take that as just ETH. They can leave it as validators, and then the rewards they get from the network for having those validators spun up can be used as funding as well.
That's exactly
which is
our
really
intention.
Cool. Yeah. So, and the figures about, I think, at current price is $13 million worth of ETH per core team. So it's not chump change, obviously, and as ETH goes up, from the efforts that you guys put into the network to get all those milestones.
US dollars, right?
Yeah, US dollars. Sorry. I live in Australia, but I always think in US dollars because no one in crypto thinks in Australian dollars. They're dollary dues to everyone in crypto. But yeah, so I thought that was really cool. Instead of just giving ETH, they actually gave it as validators, because it makes a lot of sense. Because obviously, there is that kind of like split right now between quote unquote ETH1 and ETH2 teams, which are execution layer and consensus layer teams. But at the time of the merge, that just all becomes one. Everyone's working towards kind of like, pretty much at this point, everyone's working towards the same goal anyway, but it just becomes one holistic thing. And we're no longer on proof of work. Obviously, we're on proof of stake there.
Do people understand? Sorry, I'm just curious, when Anthony mentions execution layer, consensus layer, does that make sense to some of you? Raise your hand if that makes sense.
Oh,
Okay.
we've done a decent job of educating so far.
30% of you guys. Maybe worth, if you don't mind, if we have like a minute or two, just explaining what the difference between the two is.
Yeah.
So in the near future, I will be performing this very critical operation called the merge, right? So we have two chains at the moment. The proof of work chain that you all know and love and use, which is secured by miners, again, obsolete technology. And then we have this new chain that has been around for, what, 14 months, 15 months, called the beacon chain. And that's proof of stake consensus mechanism. That's what Lighthouse does along with other clients. So think of it as two systems running in parallel. Two systems running in parallel, right? And what we're going to be doing over the coming months, fingers crossed, is docking or merging the two, right?
I hate that docking term.
Yeah, I don't really like it.
That hasn't caught on. I'm sorry.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't. You're right. It's kind of use a different term than merging, but yeah, you're right. It's the merge, and we'll be effectively using the beacon chain to transport the execution layer. So there's lots of cool things in Ethereum that happen. You have your transactions, your state routes, your state transitions. All of that is the execution layer. None of this exists today on the beacon chain, by the way. The beacon chain is kind of just coming to consensus by itself, for itself, and it's just getting ready for the big moment happening in a few months' time. So the consensus layer in like future of Ethereum, hopefully in the next few months, will be secured by the proof of stake, or GASPA, consensus algorithm. And then it'll be the new vehicle for all these transactions, all this execution layer. So when we say ETH2 is consensus, ETH1 is execution, it's a bit of a shortcut, but in the near future, we'll just be cooperating as one.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why the ETH2 kind of like terminology was retired, is because the Ethereum roadmap, it's not ETH1 or ETH2, it's like we're all working towards the same goal here with major upgrades, obviously proof of stake with the merge and sharding and statelessness and so many other upgrades coming. It just didn't make sense to call it ETH2 when once the merge happens, it's just Ethereum, right?
Exactly.
So that's why that was kind of retired. And I know people were kind of like a bit of uproar about it. It's like, oh, does this mean ETH2 is cancelled? No, the only thing that changed was the terminology. The roadmap pretty much remained the same. I mean, the roadmap changes a lot too, but at that point, the roadmap has pretty much remained the same since Vitalik first envisioned it in 2014, I think. Like proof of stake sharding, the implementation details have changed, but the core
it's become
concepts.
optimistic. Roll-up centric.
Yeah. Layer 2 centric. Yeah, I think that was the biggest change. For sure.
I think so too.
But
we've been pretty consistent with the original thoughts, I guess.
And I mean, it's also gotten simpler over time, I think, with the different roadmap items in terms of kind of like, there were grand ideas of how sharding would work, and then we're like, okay, well maybe that's too difficult and that doesn't really work the way I want it to, and then as you said, we went to like the roll-up centric roadmap a couple of years ago, which is what Ethereum's kind of like on right now, where we don't kind of like scale the layer 1 in, like other kind of like layer 1 blockchains will do. We kind of keep that as like a security settlement layer. And layer 2 is kind of like the scalability. But this is what, the kind of the work you're doing with the merge will enable sharding and things like that as well.
Correct. Yeah, it's a prerequisite for the future of Ethereum, where we have 64 different shards. We think of them as subchains that are responsible, in this case, for holding data for those rollups. All orchestrated by this beacon chain.
Wish we had enough time to go through all of that, but we have to move on.
Hit me up if you have any questions, I'll be around.
So speaking of the merge, we obviously last week had a major milestone with the Litecoin Testnet, which was a testnet to basically run through the merge like it's going to be on mainnet, essentially. We'll get as close to how it would play out on mainnet as possible. Can you just kind of like walk us through what that experience was like, as a client developer, and like what went right, what went wrong, and kind of like what you see going forward?
Yeah, sure. So these testnets are so crucial at making sure that things go well, right? So I'm sure by now everybody knows in the room, but just reiterating, we're talking about a procedure that will upgrade a network with hundreds of billions worth of value in a sort of live fashion. So you kind of don't want to screw that up, right? So there's lots of testing happening at the moment, and the best way we have really is by running public testnets and really reaching out to anyone and everyone to try and see if they can break the testnet, because that's how we learn. So we've gone through a few iterations of different testnets, and as you said, Anthony, the latest one was very interesting. So a few different learnings, I guess. One of the clients, the consensus clients, had a very interesting bug, which prevented it from effectively producing valid blocks after the merge transition. Turned out to be a very, very intricate detail. And without boring you with the details, it's basically got to do with the way we read the numbers, the bytes. So there's this thing called endianness in computer science. So it really depends. Like you have a string, right? A string of numbers or hex characters. You can decide whether you want to read it from left to right or right to left. So everyone made the decision a while ago to swap the beacon chain to a little endian, so meaning that you read from left to right. And then one of the implementations had a bug where they were expecting from right to left. So this is, the devil really is in the details here, right? And this is important for us to be able to, catch these before they go live and really running through that actual transition process as many times as we possibly can, and hopefully trying to iron out any possible bugs and hopefully figure out and list out all the possible scenarios where things could possibly go wrong, and have a contingency plan in case they do.
Yeah, and as Mehdi mentioned, like this is not a small endeavor. This is the largest upgrade in Ethereum's history for a network that is no longer worth $10 billion as it was a few years ago. It is worth $300 billion today, settles trillions of dollars of value, has hundreds of thousands of millions of people using it, and we're doing it live. It's not like, well, there's going to be some maintenance, guys.
We're not pausing this stuff, right?
Exactly.
We're not saying like, sorry guys, you can't trade your NFTs for 2 hours. No, this is all happening.
Yeah, 1 minute, like one block, it'll be proof of work. The next block, kind of.
That's it. Miner's gone.
Yeah, and the thing is, from a user perspective, you won't feel this unless you're actually looking for it.
Oh yeah. Maybe we should clarify. There's a lot of people are freaking out about this stuff from like a usability standpoint.
Yeah.
Nothing will change for you developers and users. You can still trade your, NFTs or whatever you guys doing on Uniswap these days. Literally nothing changes. Right?
Yep.
Your MetaMask or whatever wallet you use will just still behave the exact same way. We'll just be saving 99.8% electricity.
That's it. And that was a big concern for a long time. I remember before the beacon chain kind of came to be, it was people kind of like questioning, like, how are we going to do this transition? Like, are we going to have to clone everyone's accounts over and things like that? And it was just, it was kind of scary at one point where you're like, wow, this is a lot of work. This is a big task. So like, can we even do this?
This is the time when we were contemplating having custom execution engines. Right?
Yeah.
And we were like, how on earth are we going to be able to differentiate between like Ether that's been came to existence in the beacon chain and Ether from the old world? And lots of work has been done. Again, a lot of work that has now been sort of discarded, but helped inform the decision of the current design, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's been a long time coming, since 2014, since Vitalik first spoke about proof of stake. Yes, work has been scrapped here and there, but I think the core details and the core premise of it has remained the same.
I believe so.
Yeah. So that's very, very cool. Okay, so we spoke about that. I guess like you already touched on why we're doing the merge, but I guess you talk about proof of work being obsolete technology, right? And that will anger a lot of Bitcoin maximalists. They will hate you for that. But I would like to get your kind of like view on that, your opinion on that. Like, why do you believe proof of work is kind of like quote unquote obsolete? And why do you believe that proof of stake is better? Maybe just a high level kind of thing.
So obviously there's the very, very, very obvious argument of energy consumption and caring about our planet, our kids and whatnot. If you don't buy into this narrative, I have, I guess, other
maybe we can go into that because everyone knows about the energy.
Exactly.
Kind of maybe we go into like...
So security is
security.
Right? So there's this cool thing with proof of stake that allows us to penalize people that haven't been performing the way they should be performing. Whereas in the proof of work world, you don't really have that. The only level of action that you can take is related to the rewards that the miners could potentially obtain. Right? So these people are like buying a whole heap of GPUs, farming, like massive mining farms. But if they were to behave not according to the protocol, there's really nothing you can do to those miners, right? Like you're not going to rock up and like confiscate the GPUs, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. Whereas in the proof of stake world, you obviously need to deposit a certain amount of value to be part of this system, and we can use that value to punish you if you misbehave. All of a sudden, this changes everything in terms of security assumptions, really. Another thing that will be very cool, or is very cool already, but will be even cooler once we have merged the two layers, is finality. Right? So you know how when you transfer tokens to your favorite exchange to sell them for whatever NFTs you're collecting, you need to wait sometimes 40 blocks, sometimes 20, sometimes 30. It really depends on the risk appetite of those platforms. But the reason why you have to wait is because there's always a potential for reorgs, right? So what we consider the canonical chain at a certain point in time with proof of work can change, right? This is by definition, this is how it works. Furthermore, it can be attacked. 51% attacks are definitely a reality. Just ask our friends at Ethereum Classic. Right? Last year, I think, was it just last year, right?
They've
Less than 12
they've
months
had
ago.
so many, I don't.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah. So if someone takes over 51% of the actual hashing power, you're screwed. You can just pack up your stuff and find another chain.
Yep.
Right. Whereas with proof of stake, I think there's a lot of interesting mechanisms in place that prevent us from or allow us to effectively punish bad actors and also leverage the power of the game theory, I guess, or economic incentives to make sure that things run smoothly.
Yeah. And when you say us, you're talking about the Ethereum protocol itself, right? Not us as humans. We're not going to go in there and say, you're bad, do that,
No,
right?
this all happens sort of automatically. If you run Lighthouse, you can run Lighthouse with the slasher option, and the slasher effectively behaves as a cop on the network and spots anything that shouldn't be there, and can effectively prove to the protocol that this attestation or this block or this particular consensus object is not behaving as per the spec. And the protocol is equipped to verify that claim and to reward the person who found that, and obviously punish the validator who's been misbehaving. So absolutely, it's not like we're looking at the chain manually and trying to spot these faults. No. It all happens programmatically thanks to the amazing work done by Michael from our team, who's built a great slasher, who's been now used by other implementations, at least the design. So,
Yeah. And I guess on that topic as well, when you're talking about kind of like the punishments and things like that, Vitalik once had a blog post about this where he called it kind of like the spawn camp attack, where with proof of work, as you said, it's not like we can go confiscate the miners, we can't burn the mining farm down, we can't do anything to them, right? The best you could do in a sustained scenario where a miner keeps attacking a proof of work network is you change the hashing algorithm, but then you punish all the honest actors as well because they're using the same mining equipment, right? They're using the same hashing algorithm. Whereas with proof of stake on Ethereum, you can do targeted punishment where it's like you say, okay, well, this, we know this, you're doing a bad thing, we being the network, we're going to slash you. And slashing basically takes a portion of your ETH and kicks you out of the active validator set. So you're no longer a validator. To re-enter, you have to go through the whole process again, deposit another 32 ETH, all that sort of stuff there. And I mean, you'd probably be able to talk a little bit more about this, but there's different kind of like penalties. Like if you go offline, there's not really much of a penalty, right? It's not a slash, it's an inactivity.
Exactly.
It's called,
Thank
right?
you. Very important to distinguish between the two, because people are like, oh my God, my laptop is off, I'm going to get slashed. No, you will not.
The cool thing is about the offline penalties is that you can technically be offline for 6 months of the year, and if you're online for 6 months of the year, you would just net out to zero. So you wouldn't actually lose anything, you wouldn't gain anything, but you just net out. So, I mean, I moved houses recently, and my box was offline for a couple of days, but it was fine. Like I just made that back. Like obviously I lost some from there, but I think that's another key point that a lot of people miss is that going offline is not the end of your validator, right?
Yeah, so there's two types of, I don't know how much time we have, but...
I've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay, two main families of slashable offenses when you run the beacon chain. There's one thing where you should, like if you propose twice, if you propose a block twice, 2 different blocks, you shouldn't be doing this, obviously. So if we can prove this, we're like, okay, this block has a different root or hash than this other one, and they were both submitted at the same time by the same proposer. Can't do that. We'll slash you. We'll take 1/3 of your funds. We'll burn those, and you can take the rest. But as Anthony said, you have to re-exit and then come back again, top it up with that third that we took, and top it up again. The other thing that could cause you to be slashed is double voting and surround voting. So the way we come to consensus on the beacon chain is by having every single validator vote every epoch, which is 5.2 minutes. There's 32 slots, 12 slots per 12 seconds per slot. So every epoch, every 32 slots, every single validator needs to vote. And we can prove that you may have voted in a malicious way. For example, if you're contradicting yourself, right? If there's 2 votes that should point to the same sort of state and they're not, we got an issue. And same with surround voting, but this is a bit more elaborate. I might leave it out. But if you're offline, you will not be slashed.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that with the double voting and things like that, we've seen a fair few validators accidentally do it because they set up redundant setups to come online at the same time. Maybe you can talk about that for a minute or so.
Oh, yes. Okay. So institutionals, maybe some of you are in the room. A lot of people are very worried about maximizing their profits, right? And want to have redundancy and contingency plans. So multiple hosts running the same validator keys. This is a recipe for disaster. And we've seen, particularly early on, some of them quite prominent staking platforms getting burnt by this. Because what happens is, if you have two hosts, two different machines, running the same validator keys, they will contradict themselves at some point. It is just a matter of time. And if that happens, Michael made sure that the slasher will pick that up and you will lose your funds. So we had all these convoluted designs of backup designs that were presented by various staking pools. And really our message was keep it simple. The gain is not worth the risk. And we've actually introduced native backup functionality in Lighthouse, where you can tell your validator client to connect to multiple different beacon nodes. And if one of them is offline, it will automatically, in a safe way, try to use the others. Same with the ETH1 or the consensus layer connection. You can have different consensus layer clients talk to the same beacon node and act as a fallback in case the primary one defaults.
Yep. I always thought that was interesting when I saw that happen. Like at the early days, people just weren't aware of that, of the fact that redundant setups like that were going to result in them being.
Yeah, we really tried. Hey,
I mean, take it from me. I tried.
Yeah. I bet
some people just don't want to listen, but that's okay.
So that's way sometimes.
Yeah. So that's, I think, definitely a big deal. And maybe some of you might be thinking this, but Ethereum's proof of stake, just as a general note, is very different to a lot of the other proof of stake implementations out there. It is, in my opinion, it is the best proof of stake implementation that we have.
Very elegant.
By far. A lot of them are what's called delegated proof of stake, which is very different to Ethereum proof of stake. So that's why there's a lot of these things like slashing and a lot of these things that have been thought about that go into it. Even things as technical as something called BLS signatures, which are which is what enables us to have so many validators. Because there's about 300,000 validators on the network, which each one of them have 32 ETH to enter the validator set. And to do that in a scalable way, to have them all vote on everything and attest to everything, it's
crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And because of latency issues and things like that as well, it's a crazy effort. That's why it's taken so long. And that's why I always try to tell people, it's this isn't something that we can just do overnight. This is groundbreaking, bleeding edge research.
Literally is. The construction that you're talking about, the cryptographic primitive that you're talking about, the BLS signature aggregation, that's fairly new. We're going to be one of the first systems to ever use it in production. There's other chains that have been experimenting with it, but it's beautiful. It's you can verify an arbitrary number of votes, right? As long as they vote for the same thing in the same amount of time, it would take you to verify one vote. So when you're trying to scale a network with hundreds, maybe soon millions of participants, scaling is always the issue, and signature verification is always the bottleneck. So we've kind of found a very clever way of aggregating these attestations and verifying their signature in one shot, which was a game changer, as you can imagine. Yeah, and this is what I love about Ethereum more generally, is that a lot of these, as far as I understand, these kind of cryptographic primitives have been around in theory land for a while, right? And they just never had any practical implementation. But now they do. So and Justin, Dankrad, and Vitalik are really good at that, just picking all these interesting cryptographic primitives. And you know what? We can use this. And that's why so many cryptographers, so many people are just really excited that their work is finally seeing implementation. And not even just at layer 1, but at layer 2, obviously with a lot of the ZK stuff that's going on right now. A lot of that has existed for decades. But it's just now has practical application. So and obviously people are incentivized to do it because there's money to be made and things like that. Totally. So, it's just, that's one of my favorite things about Ethereum, and it applies to everything. All right, we've got about 3 minutes left. So last thing I wanted to touch on, which is obviously very important in Ethereum, is client diversity. So we don't just have one core kind of clients. Bitcoin only has Bitcoin Core that runs the majority of the network. We have
5 production consensus clients from my reading? Or
Yeah.
4, 5?
Yeah, 5. Let's say 5.
5, yeah, 5. Lodestar I saw went into production, but
Yeah, it is. I think it's validating on mainnet.
Yeah, yeah,
Congratulations to ChainSafe,
yep,
for sure.
Yep, and a bunch on the execution layer as well. That changes from time to time. Obviously, we had Parity, which became
Open
something
Ethereum,
else.
which became nothing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
but the kind of like issue with client diversity is always around how do we get people to run the clients in such a way that it's actually diverse. It's all well and good to have 4 or 5 production ready clients on the consensus layer, but right now there is a client, Prism, that has a supermajority. So they have over 67% of the network, and that's obviously not ideal. Now I'm not going to.
So, when was the last time you looked at those numbers?
A couple of weeks ago. Is there more numbers that I've missed?
I think so.
Is it less than 67%?
Yeah. I
Okay.
think
Maybe you can explain why having more than 67%
sure.
is a bad thing for any one client.
Yeah, that's a good start, I guess. What happens if you have a bug, right? Like say, so there's 4 or 5 different implementations of the same spec. One of the implementations has a bug, right? A bug with effectively an invalid state transition, right? What happens there? If other clients don't have that bug, we're fine. The 20%, 23%, effectively up to 50%, 65% of the users who have been on the bogus client, they'll just sort of fork off and won't finalize their chain. And at some point, that client team will fix that bug and they'll be able to hop back on the canonical chain. No dramas. The problem starts when you have clients that have over 66% of the voting power on the network. Because with that threshold, you can effectively finalize your own chain. And you don't want to do that. If you finalize your own chain, it means that you're effectively, you can't really come back on the canonical one. So that threshold is really critical. And it really doesn't benefit users from using a majority client, a super majority client. A lot of people are saying, you know what, I'm going to go with the most popular because if it has a bug, I'm sure we'll fork mainnet to fix the bug. Guess what?
It would require social consensus to go back.
I don't want to be quoted on this, but I'd be extremely surprised if the Ethereum community was to support a fork for a valid state transition, right? If the state transition is valid as per the specification, does not matter if 80% of the network is wrong. They're wrong, right? We have a canonical spec, and that's what we'd be following. So do yourself a favor. If you're running a majority client, consider running others. If you stake with a staking pool, be it a centralized one or a decentralized one, ask them what clients they run. In fact, you don't even need to ask them anymore. Michael's done an amazing job at doxing everyone. We know everyone's validators. We know exactly what Kraken runs, what Coinbase runs. Like, everything is wide. Like, we know. So what we need you to do now is put pressure on those institutions and be like, okay, you want my money? You want to stake my ETH? Then make sure you run a minority client. And I want to see that. And you can see that now. Can't remember the name of the website, but there's a new website. Maybe we can link it at some point. Which tracks the actual identity or client identity behind the most or the biggest depositors in the Beacon chain. So do your part. Lobby the hell out of your exchanges and make sure that they know to use a minority client. It's in their best interest, really, and yours at the end of the day.
Yep, exactly. Well, that's good. All right, we've got time there. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Hopefully this has been educational for you. I know there's a lot of confusion around this sort of stuff. I try to do my best, but in my own kind of like ways, and so do you, Mehdi, but hopefully this helped a lot as well. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
The funny thing, obviously, we've all, at least at a previous life, gone to a million conferences. It's rare that you don't see at least 50% of the people on their phones at any point in time during any session. There weren't a lot of phones out because the truth of that kind of conversation is if you look away for a minute, you've lost the conversation in its entirety. So, I watched, and I know there were some people that looked particularly enthused and others that looked a little bit confused. But either way, that was the point. So that's funny. We can hear that video playing, by the way. The next conversation is from JHL, who's responsible for Serum. It is a protocol for decentralized exchanges. And the thing that is particularly interesting for me about this kind of conversation is as businesses are being built out, as exchanges are being built out for argument's sake, people are building out decentralised exchanges. There is no opportunity here just to sit and not to do something. The businesses that people are building today are being disrupted by the businesses that people are building today, which is an extraordinary thing in terms of the way this ecosystem is playing out. So JHL is not one to put the face on the screen. So I think we need to switch to that. Are we good to switch, fellas? What, sorry? Not yet. Okay, I'll keep chatting. I'll go back to that. One of the other things that sort of comes up from the conversation, just give me the thumbs up when it's ready to go. One of the other things that comes up from the conversation before is language. Now, you heard a lot of things which are going to be very unfamiliar to a lot of people who are watching at home in particular. The language isn't exclusive. You know, it's funny, one of the myths for me of the ecosystem is people say, well, you know, this language, this jargon, the jargon's been created in real time. Right. So it's not as if people are trying to exclude people. I can tell you from the legal profession, for example, having been involved in it some years ago, it's difficult language that people struggle to follow with, and it's been settled largely for a long period of time. This is not that kind of language. You know, this is stuff that is being built out in real time. So when people go, it's a lot of jargon and we're being excluded from it, you're just not paying attention. You've got to own that responsibility to keep up with what's happening. I listen to, as I said, Anthony, the bankless crew every single week, and you listen and say, this is something I've not heard before, and then the question is, do I want to give a few minutes to this subject matter? So it's kind of that's the way I approach it as well. So it's just something that I think it's important to know in amongst the mix. The other thing that Anthony touched on as well is that this is an ecosystem that's constantly under attack. You know, I led a conversation around cybersecurity in the National Blockchain Roadmap, and Mehdi was involved in that conversation. And we found very quickly that there are two conversations, one that is cybersecurity and blockchain blockchain in cybersecurity. And the truth is the cybersecurity industry doesn't care too much for blockchain. They're busy, they're under-resourced, they're doing a lot of things to kind of protect the world. The people in crypto, blockchain, they're always thinking about cybersecurity because they're perpetually under attack, because things are perpetually in production. And if you make a mistake, you pay the price for it. So again, that's a psychological shift for businesses that say, well, just make sure it's perfect before it ships, versus going the other way. So that's just something else, again, for those outside the ecosystem. It's important to understand that's the case. How are we looking, fellas? Still waiting. Where's Sassano? Let's go grab. If they're still around, can someone go grab Anthony and Mehdi? If there's any Q&A that people want to sort of ask, I figure it's a good opportunity. Otherwise, we might swing to the other feed, fellas. Excuse the dead air for a second as we tend to this issue. Hey. Rob just asked me to tell a joke. I have no jokes. I did say this morning, someone said, tell me a joke. I said the joke is regulatory certainty. That's the joke. We're some distance from that happening.
Maybe ask the audience what would you call a semi-hard fork?
Fellas, we've got you some extra time. Okay. Making the way back to the stage. This is very show style. We've got to come back and we've gone, please, an encore, fellas. Thank you for coming back for the encore, fellas. Can we mic up the boys again, Michelle?
Any questions? Any questions?
Fire away, people. This is I like the confidence. Enjoy this. Enjoy the Q&A.
So someone is asking why the threshold is 66%, because that's what we need to finalize the chain. So every time there's a vote, so we basically vote on what we think, or each validator votes on what they think is the canonical chain. And if 66% of the network has voted on the same block root, then we consider that as finalized, and it's now a finalized block. This has to do with lots of, I guess that's the reason behind Gaspa, so it's Caspa with some sort of changed fork choice rules, but that's the whole sort of premise behind the proof of stake model.
Maybe on that quickly, just maybe briefly explain what finality actually is.
Yeah, so, yeah, good point. So you can consider that something is finalized when you can't possibly revert that. We have enough guarantees to consider that this version of history will always remain in history, right? This is what we don't have that. We don't really have that concept in proof of work, so it's kind of hard to compare to what Ethereum is currently doing. But this is the premise, right? We have voted for this thing, and that thing has happened long enough for us to guarantee that this will always be part of our history. Proof of work is always subject to 51% attack, so it doesn't really, theoretically, it doesn't give you that finality concept. So it's a bit hard to, again, map to the existing Ethereum, but that's the plan.
Fellas, this is going to be the shortest Q&A session in history. He's jumped on. You've saved the day, fellas. So let's do those questions in the other room.
Just catch me there if you have any.
Thanks, boys. I appreciate you coming back at short notice.